Ikazune is garbage. As of right now and probably forever, Ikazune will stay as one of the worst offensive fire type Loomians in the game. As more and more Loomians get released into the game, Ikazune's problems become even more clearer and become even more harder to deal with. So why do I think Ikazune is so garbage? Well, let's get into the video. Before I trash on Ikazune, let's give this Loomian some credit, okay? When you look at Ikazune's base stats, the first thing that gets your attention is Ikazune's high base range attack stat of 139 and a base energy stat of 125. While high energy stats are very common among the Loomians of the game, Ikazune's energy stat is really high. This especially pairs very well with Ikazune's move pool. It has 2 high base power moves and a 70 base power light type move. Those moves being Thunder Strike, Fire Breath, and Energy Surge. To make it even better, it has a choice to run Magnify, arguably the best boosting move in the game for range attackers. However, that's where the positivity ends for Ikazune. The rest of Ikazune's base stats and typing and coverage completely dumpsters this thing's viability. So let's talk about the base stats first. So before we dive into Ikazune's base stat spread, we need to talk about what Loomians fall under which role. If you don't know what roles are, those are basically the difference of Loomians in the PvP meta. Well, the 3 main roles that you need to be worried about are wall breakers, cleaners, and walls. While there are special roles like the revenge killer, the offensive sweeper, and support Loomians, well, those kind of fall in two of those categories, and they're basically have a lot of similarities with those 2 main roles, so you don't really need to be worried about those roles. So the common attributes among those roles are, well, let's start off with the wall. A wall has high defensive stats, so it can wall Loomians, and it can eat up attacks that might threaten your team, and they have low speed. This low speed pairs with their walling capability, allowing them to take the hits first, so then they can either switch out into whatever they want to, or maybe damage the offensive game in back. And while most of the walls in the game have generally low attack stats, there are some exceptions to having high attack stats for a wall. And for wall breakers, it kind of gets complicated from here, because, well, for a wall breaker, you have very high attack stats. Don't get me wrong, they're really high, but here's the difference between walls and wall breakers. Wall breakers either have high speeds, well, not high speeds, they either have decent speeds and low bulk, or decent bulk and low speed. Loomians that have low bulk and high speeds are stuff like Wrestling and Carolyn, and Loomians with low speed and decent bulk are like Valkyrie and Metagon. And for our last role, we have offensive cleaners. They have decent attack stats comparable to walls, and they have even lower defenses than the offensive wall breaker. However, their speed tiers are unmatched by any of the roles in the metagame. So those are the 3 roles. But what makes Ikazune such an interesting case is that it doesn't really fit neatly into one of the roles. It actually has more negatives than positives in its base stats. And what do I mean by this? Well, Loomians that are affected negatively by their unusual stat distribution are Loomians that are pretty much unusable. Loomians like this are Ikazune. Well, yes, Ikazune has a high range attack stat and a really high energy stat for throwing off its powerful moves. This thing's defenses fucking suck. First off, both defensive stats are below average. which is arguably the lowest possible defensive stats for an offensive Loomian, i.e. Ikazune's melee defense is 62, and his base range defense is 78. Not to mention that Ikazune's base HP stat, which is base 68 HP, is one of the most pitiful HP stats for an offensive wall breaker. No, Ikazune is not even a good wall breaker. Ikazune's speed here is even worse, well, arguably worse than its base defenses and HP. Ikazune has a base speed of 74, while that speed here might actually be pretty good, because you got Loomians like Valkyrie, Mutagon, Wrestling, Servalin even, around that speed tier. The thing that separates those Loomians from Ikazune is that to make up for their low speed, they have good bulk. And if you didn't get what I was trying to say earlier, Ikazune's defenses, there is no sugarcoating for this. Like, if I were to find a good way to convince you that Ikazune's base defenses are good, well, both of us are on drugs. And you must be wondering why having good defensive stats or a good speed tier is needed for wall breaking when all you need is quote-unquote damage. Well, you have another thing coming. Like I said earlier, most wall breakers are slow. They don't have the ability to outspeed a bunch of Loomians other than walls, and in order to get damage and force the opponent to switch, they need to get in the battle in a different way. This way is by switching in. Using their bulk, they are able to switch in on Loomians and have a good base defenses. Being able to switch in on Loomians and having good base defenses is essential to making a slow wall breaker viable. When you look at Ikazune, it clearly doesn't have those base stats. And while I did say that you need a good speed tier, you either need good bulk or a good speed tier to be a decent wall breaker, Ikazune doesn't have a good speed tier either. Stuff like Kirillin, Wrestling, Servalin, all have good speed tiers because they can outspeed slower offensive Loomians like Colossotrops, Valkyrie, Mutagon. Ikazune can't do that. While yes, it does outspeed Mutagon, but Mutagon does have Quick Punch. Priority kills Ikazune, if you couldn't tell. Valkyrie is just a little bit out faster than Ikazune, and Wrestling and Kirillin kill this thing. So if you combine the negatives of Ikazune, it has negatives like having low speed and low bulk. This doesn't translate very well, because this means that Ikazune can't even switch in on the battle or outspeed Loomians. So Ikazune is really hard to use. However, you might say that Ikazune does have hope, because you are about to say Ikazune's secret ability, Overcharge. And yes, it boosts its speed by one stage, being able to outspeed every single thing in the metagame. But the downside to this ability is that you need to absorb an electric type move, and the boost goes away when you switch out of the battlefield. Well, we're only going to be focusing on one negative here, and that you need to absorb an electric type move. While there are certain situations where you can successfully pull this off, this ability is one of the most inconsistent abilities in the game as of this recording. The common Loomians in the metagame that have electric type moves are Zulong and Protagon. Only two. Just two Loomians with electric type moves. However, you might say, okay, let's include Joltooth. Why not? But if you couldn't tell, the amount of Loomians with electric type moves is practically non-existent. While you can give the argument of Zulong and Protagon appearing a lot in the Battle Coliseum, you have another thing coming. Zulong and Protagon and Joltooth aren't safe switch-ins for Ikazune, with the most common Zulong sets, Very Smart, Frail, Foolish, Zulong's Elemental Burst, does over 50% of Ikazune's health. This does two things to Ikazune. One, Ikazune's ability to switch in on Zulong to try and absorb an electric type move and other Loomians is practically even more garbage than before. And two, Ikazune has an even harder time getting into the battle and doing damage, hindering this thing's viability. So, okay, well you might mention very nimble Zulong. Zulong still does 50% to Ikazune. The same thing applies to Purga's Energy Surge. Even the Loomians with electric type moves gives a lot of trouble to Ikazune. And if you wanna talk about Joltooth, I'm pretty sure there's no argument here. Joltooth has an ability called Ambush. Ambush doubles the damage of when Joltooth is attacking a Loomian that is switching in. And let's pretend that Ambush isn't even a thing. Joltooth has over 120 base melee attack stat, with a powerful move called Primal Slash, a 80 base power move that has a higher chance to crit Ikazune. This means that Ikazune has a very low chance of living from just those two qualities. And if you're factoring in Ambush, Ikazune is gonna die in one hit. So it's not even safe for Ikazune to switch in on Joltooth. So what did we learn from this? Well, Ikazune has a good move pool and amazing range attack and energy. But the fact that Ikazune has a lack of a good speed tier and horrendous base defenses and HP stats makes Ikazune's life of getting into the battle safely and doing damage practically non-existent. While Ikazune's secret ability Overcharge gives it some hope, the fact that you are never going to be finding Loomian with an electric type moves, and the Loomians that do have electric type moves threaten to 2-hit KO the stupid fox, makes Ikazune's life even harder. Before I end off with the video, I of course have to give the classic Eclipse thoughts, like what do I do what can the developers do to make Ikazune better? While there's pretty much only one developer on the job, like Jamie, I hope he sees this video, because I want Ikazune to get fixed and make this thing even more viable. Well, not even, I want to make this thing viable. And yeah, Ikazune at right now is not good, and especially at the fact that the meta is changing constantly, and the meta is favoring more offensive, faster Loomians, is a hard time for Ikazune. Because Ikazune can't switch in on the battle, and it can't outspeed anything. So, what can you do to fix Ikazune? Well, there's some argument that you can change Ikazune's base stats. I mean, we've seen this before. Joltooth's base stats were changed, 40 speed was removed, and it was equally distributed among the defenses, making Joltooth a slow and bulky ambush user. So that's pretty good. And we also have two other instances of base stat changes from Metronet and Wobblisk. Well, all of their base stats are getting buffed, and yeah, that's cool. So is it possible for Ikazune to get a base stat buff? Yes. And what do I mean by base stat buff? Well, here are my thoughts on buffing. First off, I think you want to remove melee attack from Ikazune. And I didn't mention this in the video, but Ikazune has over 100 base melee attack stat. While that may seem good, it's pretty much a worse range attack, because it is drastically lower than Ikazune's base 139 range attack, and the fact that Ikazune has a recoil thunder move, and the fact that it doesn't have any boosting moves for its melee side is practically useless. So what should you do? Well, you can either do two things here. You can boost the defenses or boost the speed. And if you do boost the speed, Ikazune becomes slow and frail wall breaker to a revenge killer, or rather a slow cleaner. And while the fact that a revenge killer practically makes this thing a bit better, it's probably not going to see a lot of viability, because why not use Ikazune? Why use Ikazune when you have stuff like Wrestling and Valkyrie? Stuff that offers more utility and more damage. Why not use Buzzling over Ikazune? Why not use Garbantus over Ikazune? Why not use Metronet over Ikazune? So, Ikazune has a lot of competition. If it does boost its speed, will it see viability? Maybe, but is it possible? No. So this is where I offer the solution of buffing its base defense stats. While its base defense stats may seem like a good idea, it might be a saving grace, or making Ikazune a little bit worse. And buffing its base defenses might actually give this thing a little bit more viability. And what I mean by this is, it basically becomes a range attacking Joltooth without ambush. Ikazune has high range attack, and it could finally switch in on Loomians. And this makes Ikazune a little bit better, but probably not as good as the Greats right now. And the fact that the meta is favoring water types right now and earth types, Ikazune is gonna have a hard time doing its job. So, will its base defenses or its base speed help it? Yeah. Will it be used? No. And that's where I offer another solution. Give it a defense buff and a ability rework. I would probably say something like, instead of having one immunity, give it 2 immunities. Giving it more switch time, giving it more ample time and different choices on what it can actually switch in on. So you're not forced to run one ability over the other, you can have both. Both fire and electric, boosting its speed. That sounds pretty good. But there might be an issue here because Jamie is kind of scared of giving Ikazune speed. And yeah, I get it. Ikazune is strong. It probably doesn't need the speed. And what I probably should try and mention, maybe give Ikazune Pyro. Ikazune has a high energy stat and it can abuse the Pyro ability because Pyro lowers your base energy stat when you use a fire type move. So yeah, Ikazune has potential, but that potential comes in with some developer buffs. And those developer buffs are pretty much, well, the base stat buffs are probably impossible. Like, you can't convince them, but maybe the maybe the ability might have a chance to get buffed. So yeah, this is Kind of Soups, and this is the video on why Ikazune is so bad. And I'm signing off. Have a great day or night wherever you are, and remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Bye.